Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About Money. Today I'm joined by Erin Bury, who is named one of the Globe and Mail's changemakers in 2025, and here's why. Erin is the co-founder and CEO at online estate planning platform Willful, where she drives the company's mission to ensure every Canadian has a will. Erin is also a columnist at the Globe and Mail, writing about parenting and personal finance, which we love here. She lives in Prince Edward County, Ontario, with her husband and her 2 young daughters. Welcome, Erin, and thank you for coming on Let's Talk About Money.
Thank you so much for having me, Brianna. Excited to be here.
My absolute pleasure. And we're here to talk about wills, obviously. And your company, Willful, is on a mission to ensure that every Canadian has a will. I'm so curious, what made you start? What was the catalyst for this online platform?
Yes, I mean, many people ask me if I'm an estate lawyer, and the answer is no. We partner with many amazing estate lawyers, including a few great ones here in Ontario. But it really came from the place a lot of great business ideas come from, personal experience and a pain point that we encountered and thought, we can solve this. It was when my husband's uncle passed away unexpectedly in 2015, and he had a will, but he hadn't discussed all of the elements outside of that, like funeral and burial wishes. And that experience really highlighted how important it is to have those end-of-life conversations to get the paperwork in order. But when we went to get our own wills in order, we were quoted 4 figures for, when we had a pretty simple situation. We were also tasked with making in-person appointments at lawyers' offices and having to take time off work to do this. And we just said, we can invest our money online. We could do so many things online these days. Why doesn't this exist for wills? And so we set out to build a really beautiful, intuitive, user-friendly, and most importantly, affordable way to get a will, power of attorney documents, and other estate planning documents in place online from home.
I love that sentiment because I myself run a financial services business completely online. And I think in a post-COVID world, especially for folks who are computer savvy, it just adds a lot of ease to the things that we need to do anyways, right? So I'm wondering, pre-Willful, what were the biggest barriers to estate planning that you were seeing for Canadians? Even above and beyond the cost, what was making people kind of trepidatious to get their wills?
Well, unfortunately, I'd like to think Willful has removed all these barriers, but the reality is these barriers still exist. And the first one, if you're watching this or listening, you might fall into this category. 57% of Canadian adults don't have a will. That number is as high as 90% of people under 35. And I think the biggest barrier is nothing to do with how much it costs or going into lawyers' offices. It is an aversion to thinking about or talking about our own mortality. It is just not a topic. Death is not a topic that makes its way to the dinner table. It can be uncomfortable to contemplate. There's superstition around it. If you think about it, if you get life insurance and wills, it's somehow going to bring it into your life or hasten your demise. And so as a society, we just do pretty much everything we can to avoid talking about or thinking about death. And so that's really the core of our mission. Yes, we are helping people get the legal documents, put those formal plans in place. But I always say my number one job is education, educating people about why these conversations are important, about what happens if you pass away without these plans in place, and trying to destigmatize this conversation. So hopefully it is as commonplace as saying, "How was your day?" at the dinner table.
I love that. I think that's so important because these things are going to happen and it's part of life. And whether we're dealing with aging parents who are going to face their own mortality or our own, it's just like talking about money, which I am on a mission to get people talking about, but we'll talk about wills too today because it's all tied up. So tell me, in this education vein, what is the most overlooked thing that you see when it comes to estate planning? What do people completely forget about or don't know that they need to think about?
It's a great question. There are so many myths that I hear every day about creating a will, about estate planning in general. I think the most common is, I don't need a will because I'm not old enough to need one, or I'm not rich enough to need one. You only need a will if you're old and you have a lot of assets. And while certainly that is true, A will is a document that really should be put in place as soon as you turn 18 in Ontario, right? It's there. It's like car insurance, it's there if you need it. You don't get car insurance thinking you're going to get into a car accident. It's there if you need it. And so I think that's a big misconception, that you have to wait until you've accumulated enough wealth to make it meaningful. A will is about so much more than who gets your assets. It appoints guardians for minor children and pets. It appoints an executor who has the legal authority to wrap up your life. And without a will, courts have to get involved. It can be slower, more expensive. So it's just a really nice gift to give your family to have a will, regardless of what age you are. I think the other misconception that I often hear is, well, I don't need a will because when I pass away, everything's just going to go to so-and-so, my spouse or my children. And, I look at this Gene Hackman case in the US right now, the actor who passed away. He had adult children, and, there's a formula in each province that dictates who would receive your assets if you passed away without a will. And it often doesn't match the folks that are sitting in your head that you would want them to go to. Doesn't include things like friends or charities. And if you have, like me, young children and a spouse, the assets would be split between them, right? People often say, well, I don't need a will, everything would go to my spouse. But it really wouldn't if you have minor children. Half of those assets would be tied up and held by the courts until your children turn 18. So those are probably the two biggest ones that I hear on a daily basis, and hence why education and removing and demystifying some of those myths is so important.
And what a gift to have control beyond when you're here with your loved ones, right? I had a conversation with a lawyer about prenuptial agreements not too long ago on the podcast, and it's the same thing. Unless you want the province to determine how things are done, then you really have to take it into your own hands and set something up. So let's get into it. I talk a lot with my own clients about what they have in place, because when they're buying their first home, there is a lot of moving parts and they're taking on assets, right? When somebody's looking at getting a will, what should they be thinking about primarily? So if we're thinking about children, if we're thinking about our spouse, we're wanting to take care of them, what is kind of the first step if we're looking at going to your website and getting something done? What do I need and what should I be considering?
Absolutely. I mean, I think another big misconception is that wills take a long time and require you to do a lot of preparation work. I often hear people say, well, I need to gather my tax returns and have my net worth worked out and a list of all my assets and liabilities. And that's just simply not true. A will is a really high-level document that says three things: who will be your executor to wrap up your life, who will receive your assets, and who will take care of any minor children or pets. So as long as you have the answers to those three questions, which are big questions and often require thought and discussion, you have all the tools you need to sit down to create your will. You don't need to gather all of that paperwork. While you can create an asset and liability list to go with your will and to pair with it, that's a tool that we offer on Willful as well. You typically don't include a detailed listing of your asset and liabilities in the legal will itself. And so, you mentioned earlier about Willful being a great option for folks that are computer savvy. I heard from someone the other day who said, I'm 88 years old and I used Willful to go through it. And what we're really finding is that we have folks of all demographics using Willful, because especially for folks who are retired and on a fixed income, they might be getting quoted $800, $1,000 to either create or update a will. And so, I will highlight, Willful is just one way to get your will done. I'm very passionate about getting your will done, period. If your comfort level and budget means, or life situation, the complexity of it means going to a lawyer, sitting face to face, having that conversation, getting legal advice, absolutely more power to you. But nothing in Ontario law says that you need to do that, or Canadian law. So you can visit a website like Willful, and it's really like that TurboTax style experience. We guide you through every step of the process. We help you appoint key roles like your executor. We create a customized set of documents for you that you then have to print and sign according to the law to make them legal. But it's this guided experience where we really help you do it yourself.
That's amazing and so accessible. And I love that you broke down the three parts that we actually need to be able to set up our will, because what you were previously explaining is actually more like a mortgage application, which is much more work, it sounds like.
It is actually. It is more arduous to get a mortgage and to go through that process of providing tax returns and property tax bills and all of these things than it is to actually sit down and do a will. I mean, we say on our website you can get it done in as little as 20 minutes, and people often say, is that some sort of like infomercial tagline? That it can't be possible to take that little time. But if you look at our reviews on Trustpilot and Google, the consistent thing that I hear from folks, whether it's in reviews or directly, is this has been sitting on my to-do list for 1, 5, 10 years. And the reason I didn't do it is because it always seemed like this impossible task. It was going to take hours. It was going to be this really overwhelming thing. And once they do it, they're like, oh, that's it. It really actually isn't that difficult. You actually can do it in 20 minutes. So that's what I would say. If you're watching or listening to this and it's been lingering on your to-do list, it actually is probably a tenth of the time of going through a mortgage application process.
There are definitely some listeners or viewers who are going to feel called out, but that is good. A little bit of tough love today.
I'm the accountability partner today, Brianna.
We love that, because you know what? All of the information will be in the show notes, and it's just a click away. So yes, definitely go and explore those resources. Now, let's talk a little bit about the cost of dying. This is something that I read about often in articles. And what should we be aware of when it comes to the financial and maybe logistical burdens that will fall on our families? What should we be thinking of in that sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you're thinking about depends a little bit on your stage of life, right? I'm turning 40 this year, and so am I thinking about prepaying for my funeral or cremation? No, it's not really top of mind for me, whereas my dad, who's in his 70s, might be more apt to put more formal pre-planning in place when it comes to funeral arrangements and things like that. But realistically, wills are like life insurance. They're something that never benefits you. If you buy a life insurance policy, by definition, you have to pass away for the policy to be paid out, and that's really like a will. The benefits of it are streamlining the process after you pass away. So often, if you pass away without a will, it lengthens the amount of time. It requires more court processes, which can mean paying more legal fees to navigate that. But a will, to your point, there's so many components to the cost of dying. There's the immediate costs, like the funeral and burial costs, and whether your family would have cash on hand to be able to pay for that. Because keep in mind, it takes 12 to 18 months for an estate to be settled and for most of the money from an estate to be paid out to beneficiaries, which is why a lot of people use strategies outside the will, like life insurance. So for example, I have a life insurance policy that names my husband as the beneficiary. If I were to pass away, that policy would actually not flow through the will because I've named him directly on it. It would flow directly to him, and he would be able to use those proceeds in a matter of weeks to pay for things like funerals or celebrations of life. And to handle any of the immediate costs, and then the estate settlement would take a lot longer. And many of the costs of dying are not actually out of pocket to you as the executor or family member. They are an expense of the estate. So things like funeral or burial costs, or if I'm an executor on one of my parents' wills, I can actually hire a professional like a lawyer or accountant to help with that process, and that would come out of the estate instead of my pocket. So lots of costs of dying, but not all of them have to be incurred by you personally. And it's a reminder that a will is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to end-of-life planning. It's really a holistic strategy, as I'm sure you tell your clients, that includes life insurance and registered savings and joint assets and a whole host of things.
Mm-hmm. And just like everything we talk about on this podcast, whether it be insurance, whether it be protecting your assets, end of life planning, it all requires a plan, right? And it requires some intentional thought behind it. So again, why not start now? If you're waiting, like Erin said, then the impetus is now to start. Right? So let's pivot a little bit. And I know that you and I are in a similar stage of life where we have young children. Now, that adds another layer to end-of-life planning. So can you talk about some considerations that parents should be making when they're setting up their will?
Absolutely. Well, our number one customer segment at Willful is young parents, parents who are
That's
thinking
so
about,
interesting.
wanting to, protect their kids financially, but also who want to make sure they're taken care of in case something happens to them and the other parent or guardian. And so, for example, one of the big things you do in a will is you appoint a guardian for minor children or pets, which some people consider to be their children. My mom definitely feels that way about her horse. So that was a big decision for my husband and I. We had a will in place before we had our first daughter in 2021. And then we updated our will, which is something, that's also important. These are living, breathing documents. They should change as your life changes. So we went to add a guardian, but this classic thing happened where I said, well, I want it to be my sister. And he said, well, I want it to be my brother. And then you're kind of at an impasse. And so, my biggest piece of advice to parents, having gone through this personally, is to make a decision. It doesn't have to be the perfect decision, and that goes for everything in your will. You always have the opportunity to revisit and make updates. We actually offer free updates on Willful, so you don't have to pay the hourly rate every time you want to go back and make a change. And so, today's decision might change and evolve as your relationships and your life change and evolve. But if you don't appoint a guardian in a will and you and the other parent pass away, then the family court is going to be left to make that decision. And anybody can apply to be the guardian. So to your point, Brianna, you said earlier, it's really giving you a voice. It's putting you in the driver's seat. And that's not something I want to leave up to chance. Hence why I've really prioritized putting it down in writing.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. Yeah. Control is really everything when it comes to our finances, and it gives us choice, and we want choices to be available beyond us, right? Especially for our kiddos. So I think that's really valuable advice there,
Another
Erin.
one, Brianna, sorry to add to this
Go
is,
ahead.
it just occurred to me as well as RESPs, as a young parent of a young child. I opened RESPs shortly after my daughters were born to save for their future education. And I don't know if a lot of people know, but if you're the sole holder of an RESP and you pass away and it's not addressed in your will, that account would actually collapse. And any of those government matched funds that have been given to you over the years would have to be repaid. And so, our wills at Willful have a clause that say, no, keep that active. Make sure that I'm protecting those matched funds, because otherwise you're just handing back free money to the government. So those are the types of things that we've incorporated into our process to make sure that all of these things you're doing to protect your children and make sure that they're taken care of financially are respected even when you pass away.
I'm so glad you added that. I will take that gem you just dropped there, because that is such useful information, and sounds like I also need to update my will to reflect that. But in that vein, let's talk about something that is ever changing, digital assets. So things like social media, online banking, cryptocurrency. How do we address these things in our wills?
It's so interesting. If you think about 30 years ago, if you were the executor of someone's will, it was much simpler because often they banked with one institution, maybe a couple, and there was no digital footprint to speak of. And now think about the number of accounts we have, from online streaming services to social media to e-commerce accounts. It's pretty mind-boggling, not to mention how diversified our financial apps are, right? You might have an app for your RESP and a different institution for your savings and a different for checking. So as an executor, it can be very overwhelming to track down all of these different accounts and deal with them. The thing that we include in our will at Willful is a digital assets clause, and that gives your executor the authority to act on your behalf, to close accounts, to transfer information, or to do anything else related to your digital footprint, which is really helpful because, if they're reaching out, if your family members are reaching out to Instagram, for example, they are really only going to be able to deal with any of your accounts if they're legally authorized to do so. Outside of that, though, there's so much you can do to help your family and your executor that have nothing to do with a will or the legal documents. Things like using a password manager. I use 1Password, which is a great Canadian company, and you can store all your passwords in one place and give a trusted family member or your executor access to this for when the time comes. You can even record those on paper and store them with your will. And even just listing out the accounts that you have. Hey, you need to close my Netflix subscription. Hey, I have, my main banking at Scotiabank, but I have an account over at Wealthsimple as well. Those types of things are really, really helpful. Think of them like digital breadcrumbs for your executor so that they're not searching down all of your digital accounts. They're all listed out in one place. It's a nice thing to do. Do I think everyone watching this will do it? I don't know, but I hope you do.
Well, I don't want Netflix to charge me in perpetuity. I might want them to cancel that account.
Absolutely. Well, that's the other thing. Part of your executor's job when you pass away, or if you've been an executor, I mean, we're also in this, and many people watching and listening are probably in this unique sandwich generation where we have young kids that we want to protect, but we also have aging parents or relatives where we're going to be the ones either working as the executor or supporting the person who is the executor to track down accounts. And so a lot of these conversations are not just important for us to have with our spouses or within our own mind. It's also great to bring this up at the dinner table to say, hey, mom, dad, where are your passwords stored? Are they up in the old noggin, or have you written them down anywhere? What credit cards do you have so that I can cancel them? So to your point, Brianna, it's not Netflix or the gym charging your parents for 5 years after they've passed away.
So let's talk about the executor then. How do we choose an executor? If I'm single, who's an appropriate executor? Do they have to be older than me? Should they be younger? Tell me all there is I need to know.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, in reality, you can appoint anyone as executor who is an adult and, ideally someone whom you trust to deal with all of your wishes in the respectful way. Someone who probably is logistically close to you. It's not mandatory. They don't have to live near you, but in reality, a lot of things take in-person signatures still, and they might be dealing with a lot of your physical property or preparing a home to sell. So I would think about things like trust and proximity, and to your point, what type of life situation that person will be in when you think you'll pass away. Obviously, we know the unexpected can happen, but I've appointed my husband as executor because he knows the most about my situation. He obviously lives in our house, and I trust him. And as a backup, I've added my mom. But by the time I pass away, hopefully it's in 50 years and my mom has predeceased me. And so I've also appointed my younger sister as the backup executor to my mom. And that just underscores the importance of updating your will as time goes on. Now, you asked a question about, well, what if I'm single? What if I don't have a family member or a friend? Typically, an executor is a spouse, a parent, a sibling, an adult child. You can also appoint co-executors to work together, although will they agree? That's another question. But you can appoint a corporate executor. You do not have to appoint a personal contact because this is a big job and not everybody wants to take it on. So that could be a trust company, trust division of a bank, professional executor firm. There's a great one in Ontario called Estate Transition Planners that I know does great work in this space. So those are kind of your options, either a corporate executor or someone in your network whom you trust and who you've talked to ideally about this and is willing to take on that role, because you can turn it down. You don't have to be, if I name Oprah as my executor, she's probably going to say, yeah, no, I'm a little bit busy.
or she might give you a free card. You never know.
Hopefully.
Okay, so that's some really good information. So there are other options if we aren't wanting to put this job on our family, or if there's nobody appropriate that we think could take it on. So let's pivot a little bit. I know that you are a columnist for the Globe and Mail, and you talk about personal finance and parenting. And this is right up my alley. Previously was working in the education world, and I just love everything about money and kiddos and when you put them together. I want to know, parents are struggling right now, right? It's a very tough economic time. there's political unrest, there's all these things going on in the world. And I know that a lot of parents are really struggling specifically right now. We're talking, it's spring 2025. We're looking ahead to summer camps, and we're looking at what is on the table. I know this morning I was online at 6 a.m. to try to get the summer camp lottery so I could have childcare for my kids. I saw a recent article that you wrote about this, and I'm interested in what advice you have for parents who are dealing with this really timely issue right now.
Yeah, I love writing my Globe and Mail column. I'm a journalism graduate, a former journalist, and I love giving voice to the conversations that are happening at the playground in Prince Edward County and within my peer groups about all of these topics, many of them financial. The cost of holidays, the cost of summer camps, the cost of our attention. I mean, these are all such pressing issues, especially in this economy. The summer camp one is interesting. My children are 1 and 3, and so I'm not actually at the summer camp phase yet, but I often do call outs on my social media to parents to share their experiences, and I have never received more passionate responses from people saying, not only do I have to shell out all of this money right after the holidays when my credit card bills are painful enough, it is a Herculean effort to make spreadsheets of which camps are available when, to your point, Brianna, to log on at the right time and to claim one of the seats, especially if it's a city-run camp or one of the more subsidized or affordable camps. And then it's also just budgeting for it. I mean, I had folks who told me they spent upwards of $10,000 every summer on camp. And or they had to take a lot of time off work and use up their vacation so that they could provide childcare or bribe grandparents, which is what I'll hopefully be able to do when this hits me. But yeah, it's just, I think you hit the nail on the head that the economic climate is so uncertain right now, and the cost of basics have gone up. I mean, I don't know about your kids, but my kids can eat like $50 worth of berries a week if I let them. Never mind thinking about summer camps and education savings. And my first column that I wrote was about how my husband and I had been contemplating having a third child, and really a lot of our decision was coming down to the economic impact of having a third child and how much it would cost us in our life. And it's just interesting that, parenting and the cost of parenting have become one thing in 2025.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you're shedding light on these issues that are, you're right. I'm talking to moms at the bus stop about this. I'm having this conversation at the grocery store, on the phone with my friends. Like, it's incessant. It never stops. So I guess, what I want to say is thank you for bringing these things to light and for having the courage to have these conversations and for lending your voice to this estate planning and will conversation as well, because all these things are sentiments that we need to get out in the open so that people feel comfortable talking about them and then can find solutions in their own lives to make sure that things are going as they should. So I so appreciate your sharing today, Erin. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for shedding a light on this and for talking about financial topics openly. More shows like this are the reason that hopefully we can destigmatize conversations about money and death.
Here's hoping. So if somebody hasn't started their will yet, what's the first step they should take? Tell them where to go.
Well, we have a lot of educational resources on Willful. So whether you use Willful to create your will or not, I encourage you to go to Willful, WILLFUL.co. And check out our Learn Center, which has a ton of educational articles about everything related to estate planning. And then from there, if you're interested, you can try creating an account and going through the process. You don't have to pay until the end, so you can kind of get a flavor for it. And if it turns out you do choose to work with a professional or go another route, no problem. We also have a 30-day money-back guarantee that can, help out if it's something where you change your mind or need to go another route. But either way, take a step, and maybe we'll be back at this time next year as your accountability buddy saying, hey, have you done it yet? It's 2026 now.
Right? Go and empower yourself with some knowledge, because that's always the best first step. Thank you so much for joining me today, Erin.
Thanks so much for having me, Brianna.